Well, pleasant good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Swerve with me. This is a show where we have adult conversations for mature audiences only, and we talk to people who are not afraid to show their scars and to speak their truth. Tonight, we are taking a different twist tonight, and we'll be talking about sexual abuse among children, giving you some warning signs, giving you some signs that they may be experiencing with their behavior, with their emotions. We just want to take this time to educate tonight. And my co host tonight will be in shortly. So as you come in, go ahead and tag somebody. Let them know that Minister Beulahmae Fowler is back. She is a wealth of wisdom, and we're always happy when she stops by this platform tonight. So go ahead and tag somebody, because tonight we're talking about a subject that's very emotionally jarring, and that is child sexual abuse. And we're taking a different twist tonight. Instead of interviewing someone who may have had the experience, we're going to take a look at it from a biblical perspective. That's where my co-host comes in. And then we're going to give you some statistics and some warning signs that a child that you know, that you are acquainted with, may very well be a victim of sexual abuse. And so we have a lot of information to get through tonight, but I believe it's going to be information that's beneficial to anyone that would tune in. So go ahead and tag somebody. My co-host tonight will be Minister Beulahmae Fowler. I'm so always happy and blessed to be in her presence because of her wisdom and just the love that she exudes around whomever she is in the company of. So she'll be sharing the platform with me shortly as we go through this topic of sexual abuse in children. I want to tell you from the onset that the statistics are alarming. When I was doing the research for the show, I found out in America that every 68 seconds, that's a little over a minute, someone is being sexually assaulted. Just think about that for a minute. Every 68 seconds, someone is being sexually assaulted. Every 68 seconds. And every 9 minutes, that someone is a child. Every 9 minutes, a child in America is being sexually assaulted. In the Bahamas in 2015, the Ministry of Social Services conducted a study. And what they found out was that the Bahamas had recorded the highest rate of rape in the Caribbean. The Bahamas had recorded the highest rate of rape in the Caribbean back in 2015. Now, that doesn't mean that more people are being raped in the Bahamas. But what it does mean is that more people in the Bahamas have found a voice. They found the courage. They have found the strength to report when they have been sexually assaulted. And so we were recorded as having the highest rate of rapes recorded in the Bahamas. And then later in 2019, the Ministry of Health conducted a survey. And the survey that they conducted, they concluded that more than 1 out of every 10 persons had said they were sexually attacked, non-consensual sexual attack. More than 1 out of every 10 person, according to that survey that was done in 2019. And so you can hear from the statistics in the U.S., from the statistics in the Bahamas, we have a problem. The world has a problem about sexual abuse, about how we care for our children in particular. We're focusing on tonight, and if we get a little further, we'll go on. But I'm happy to have as my co-host tonight Minister Beulahmae Fowler. She is a minister at Jubilee Cathedral in Freeport, Grand Bahama. She's also a trained counselor, and she has a multiplicity of years in ministry. And so she has counseled, I'm sure, persons who may have been sexually abused at some point. And tonight, though, as in her role as my co-host, I'm happy to have her, and she will be sharing from a biblical perspective a story about rape and incest, and talking a little bit more about that. And we're going to take that same story and relate it to today, and how people today perhaps may have handled the very same situation. So tag somebody, let them know. My co-host, Minister Beulahmae Fowler, is here with us again tonight. And so come on and help me welcome her to the stream. Okay, good night. I hear some echo. How are you?
Oh, still having a problem.
So what I'm going to have to do is turn off my mic when you're speaking. So I want you to begin to share that story that we found in the Bible about Tamar and Ammon. So you can introduce us and tell us more about it. I'll turn off my mic.
Okay. Good night. Good night. This is really an interesting topic for this time, that it is so prevalent all around us. And but when we go into the scriptures, we find that domestic violence and sexual abuse has plagued on the society for thousands of years. Even the Old Testament contains stories of domestic violence and sexual abuse, rape and incest. As noted in 2 Samuel, the 13th chapter, scriptures tells us that the Ammon, the son of David, intentionally planned to rape his sister. He did so by playing to be sick. And the scriptures said that David, his father, went and visited him while he was sick, while he lay pretending to be sick on his bed. The king visited him, and the son asked his father, "Please let my sister come and make me a couple of heart-shaped cake in front of me." David sent word to Tamar at the palace, "Please go to your brother and prepare some food for him." So Tamar went to her brother's Hammon's house, where he laid on his bed pretending to be sick. She took dough and kneaded it, made heart-shaped cakes in front of him as he required, and then cooked them. She took the pan to serve her brother, but he refused to eat. Instead, he said, "Everyone leave the room. Everyone leave the room," he shouted. So everyone left him. Then he said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the bedroom so I can eat from your hand." So Tamar took the heart-shaped cake she had made and brought it to him in the bedroom. When she served the food, he grabbed her and said, "Come, have sex with me, my sister." But she said, "No, my brother, don't rape me. Such a thing shouldn't be done in Israel. Don't do this horrible thing. Think about me. Where could I go to hide from the shame? And you would become like a fool in Israel. Please just talk to the king. He won't keep me from marrying you." But he refused to listen to her, and he was stronger than her, so he raped her. But then, after he had raped her, he felt intense hatred for her. In fact, his hatred was so intense it was greater than the love he thought he had for her. So Amnon told her, "Get out of here." He drove her. He threw her out of his room. She said, "No, my brother. To send me away will be wrong. It will be worse than what you have already done." But he wouldn't listen to her. He called his servant and told his servant to get this woman out of my room. Get her out of my presence. And closed the door behind her. She was wearing a long sleeve robe because that was what the virgin princess wore as garment. So Amnon's servant put her out and locked the door after her. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long sleeve robe she was wearing. She put her hands on her head and walked away crying as she went. This part is just so amazing. Her brother Absalom saw her and he said to her, "Have your brother Amnon been with you?" And of course I believe she said yes. But he in turn said, "Keep it quiet for now. Keep it quiet for now, sister. He is your brother. Don't let it bother you." So Tamar, a broken woman, lived in her brother's Absalom's house in great distress. Lived in her brother's house in great distress and shame. So it is clear, even in those ancient days, victims were told to keep abuse a secret. Interestingly enough, the scripture continues to talk about the brother and the father and the consequences their action about their action as seen in this scripture. But it is just amazing as I looked at this that not much more was mentioned about Tamar. Scripture simply tells us that she remained desolate in her brother's house. She is locked away in silence, shame, violation, and trauma because of the abuse she suffered at the hands of her half-brother. Thousands of years later, millions of children and adults are victims of sexual abuse and carry the wounds even into adulthood, living in shame, desolation, and as a matter of fact, as in the same condition as Tamar, as she once did, and in silence for many, many different reasons, just like Tamar. She kept silence. And so it is prevalent today that the abuse victims are silent in their frustration and in their pain for many, many different reasons. Every one of them have different reasons, and none of the abuse cases are the same. Everyone is, their cases are different. So we have to deal with them differently. And so like Tamar, we have women and young children today, young girls today, asked by their older siblings to keep it quiet. Don't talk it, because that's your brother, or that's your father, that's your uncle. But we have to break it. Yes, we have to break it. Go ahead, Miranda.
So close your microphone, please, because I don't know what's happening. So if you close your mic, yeah. One of the things that is really stands out in that story about Tamar, Amnon, and Absalom was the fact that it was a family secret that they didn't want anybody else to know. And that sounds so familiar. So very familiar. All the stories that we hear week after week. People don't want to talk about it. And they don't necessarily consider the victim. But they consider how is the family going to look if people know what has happened to the victim. And so Tamar, and again in regards of how they consider and treat women and children who are oftentimes the victims of this kind of abuse. And so as a young girl, she was raped by her brother and her older brother, her half brother as they would say, and her older brother, which they had the same mother and father, told her to keep it secret. But that story, as you know, that goes on, it was so much more to the story than just keep it quiet, because what ended up happening, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the story, is that Absalom, she and him shared the same mother and father. Their father was King David. Absalom ended up killing his brother for raping the sister. And so it also speaks to when we hold animosity inside, the anger and the pain that it not only can cause on the victim of such a grave and intense rape, but the family members and how they are impacted by it, because they could be walking around with bitterness, unforgiveness, obviously in the case of Absalom, who ended up killing his own brother and then running away. And then his father actually was looking for him to kill him for killing his brother. So it was just a vicious, crazy cycle that stemmed from this whole idea of somebody lusting after his own sister, violating her, because I believe that sexual assault is probably the ultimate violation of a person's human rights, of who they are, when they take that power away from you to say yes or no, and they impose themselves on a victim. So tonight, our focus is really on talking about children who are the victims of child abuse, sexual abuse, and some of the things that happen. So I'm going to go down a list of behavioral things that children may experience it. And so if you have a child in your home, if you have grandchildren, my goal tonight is to really sensitize all of us to the various things that may be manifested in a child that may be a victim of sexual abuse, and you could chime in at any time when you want to say something. So I'm going to go down this list right now. So the first thing on this list about if a child is being sexually abused, for those of you who are just joining us, we're talking about sexual abuse in children tonight. My co-host is Minister Beulahmae Fowler, and I opened the show by saying every 68 seconds in America, someone is being sexually assaulted. Every 68 seconds. And then every 9 minutes, that person being assaulted is a child. Every 9 minutes, the person being assaulted is a child. And so that's alarming. And in the Bahamas, in 2019, with a survey conducted by the Ministry of Health, the Bahamas was recorded as having the highest recorded cases of rape in the entire Caribbean. That means all of our neighbors in the Caribbean, we were the country that recorded the highest number of rapes. And that's not to say that more people are being raped in the Bahamas than any other country. But to me, that suggests that more people are talking about it. More people have found their voice. More people have found the courage to report these heinous acts to the authorities. And so tonight I want to, if you have a pen or paper, you may want to write something down. But we want to start with Some of the signs, some of the behaviors that children may exhibit that may suggest that they are victims of sexual abuse. And so the first one is acting younger or going back to doing younger tasks and activities. So a child who seems to be crippled at a certain age, you're expecting them to be mature at a certain age, but they're still acting like a baby. They're still whining. And so if that is a consistent behavior for them, if a 10-year-old is acting like a toddler, a 2-year-old, they clingy and whining all the time, that may be a sign that they're being sexually abused. So that's one. A sudden change in the behavior. If the child was well behaved, the average child, and all of a sudden the behavior changes drastically, it goes on the opposite end of the spectrum. They were well behaved and nowadays they are just acting out. They may very well be a victim of sexual abuse. And then the fear of being alone with a certain person. If this child is telling you, I don't want to be with so-and-so, I don't want to go to so-and-so's house, and they keep saying this every time you bring it up. Let's go by so-and-so, uncle this, auntie that. If they keep saying that to you, that's a red flag. They may very well be a victim. Now, these things have to be consistent. Let's keep everything in context and in perspective, because you don't just want to jump to conclusions just at the very first act. But if you see a pattern developing where this child never wants to go over to a certain person's house, they're always uncomfortable or having a temper tantrum, that may be something to consider. So, the fear of being touched. They just don't want anybody to touch them. That may be a problem. Changes in the quality of their schoolwork, obviously. They're not focusing and concentrating. The grades are dropping drastically. That's a sign as well. And then they may begin to abuse substances. No matter how young they are, they may start drinking or using drugs because they may be in an environment where they have access to it. Or their friends may have access to it and they can get it from them. So any kind of substance abuse at an early age may very well be a symptom. And then, of course, you look at delinquency. They just don't want to go to school, or they skip school repeatedly. You take them to school, but you're always getting calls that they're not in school. That could be a sign. Delinquency may be a sign. Self-mutilation or careless behaviors resulting in self-harm. So kids who may be cutting themselves. So check their bodies, check their hands, check their thighs for scars. Any scarring or anything like that you can't account for, whether they fell down, had an accident, that may be a sign that they're being abused. Also, excessive play with their own private body parts. If they hypersexual, always touching themselves, playing with themselves, that's cause for alarm. And then persistent play with friends, persistent sex play. Now we know children experiment at an early age, but if this is consistent, if the teacher is always talking about this child is acting out in school and touching themselves and touching other kids, that may be a problem. Also, frequent drawings. They may draw sexual content. They may draw sexual acts. That may be a sign as well. And then we're talking about unusual, persistent, or developmentally inappropriate questions. So they're talking about sex. Most times when you raise sex with a child, they ain't necessarily want to be talking to you about sex. But if this child is coming to you wanting to talk about sex consistently, that may very well be a sign. So those are some of the behavioral patterns that may happen with a child who may be a victim of sexual abuse. Do you want to kick in at any place, Minister Fowler? Your mic is still off. Your mic is still off.
Okay. It's off now? It's on? Okay. one of the thing too that we must look out for is with especially young girls, where they have their uncle or their cousin, and that older person always want to be hugging them up, and that young girl always want to be running to that older cousin or older brother and want to be hugging, that embracing, and touching. That is one of the things. And sometime that child don't feel as if it is something wrong, but I believe now, because it's the discussion is so much more prevalent, maybe they might know better. But that is one of the trap that they fall into.
Okay, so I want to pick up again. So remember, if you're just joining us, we're talking about sexual abuse in children and some of the signs. So I just went down a list of behavioral patterns that if you see a child doing those certain things, they may be a victim. And now I want to talk about some of the physical signs that you may see. They're eating more or less than usual. So a change in their appetite. Eating more or less. This is children now, because the patterns, as I've done the research, are different. Sometimes for teenagers and young adults, they're different, and even adults who may be sexually abused. So these are specifically directed at younger children. So they're eating more or less than they usually do. They're having trouble sleeping. So they're having these nightmares. And then we know some children wet the bed, but if that increases, if they're wetting the bed more than usual, that may very well be a sign. Or they're complaining about stomach aches all the time. If the frequency of stomach aches are increasing, that may be a sign they are a victim. Or they have physical pain or itching in their genital area as you're giving them baths or whatever. So these are things that you ought to be aware of when dealing with small children, because sometimes they go unnoticed because you're just moving along. Okay, so of course if their underwear is stained with any kind of discharge, then that's a problem. Or rectal bleeding, or problems walking or sitting up. Whenever you see any of these signs, that's time to take the child to a professional. Take them to a doctor to be examined, because the child, depending on the age, may not even be able to properly explain or articulate anything to you. And so, taking that note of caution, if you see any of those physical signs, to take the child to a doctor is very, very important. I want to move on to, do you have anything to add to that, no? Do you? You can open your mic.
Go on, Miranda. Go on.
Right. So we're having a little challenge with the audio tonight, so that's why we're going back and forth like this. But so we were talking about some of the physical signs, and now listen to these emotional signs that a child may possibly be a victim of sexual abuse. Severe anxiety. So they're having nightmares and they're extra clingy. Severe anxiety or depression. They don't want to go out and play with the children. They just want to self-isolate, be by themselves. They have low self-esteem. They don't want to be around anybody. Or they have attempted suicide before. Or they're just crying for no apparent reason to you. But they're so emotional. They're always crying. And of course, if they have you all of a sudden again extreme anger, excuse me, they're throwing temper tantrums all the time. They're irritable. They don't get along well with their siblings anymore, other people in the house. Those are some of the emotional signs that something is going on with that child, and you should consider taking them to a doctor for some kind of physical examination. And so as we begin to continue to monitor and look at children especially those who are vulnerable and placed in situations where they cannot care for themselves. They don't even know how to express themselves to even share, in some cases, that something is going on with them. I think that's where the village comes into play. In the village, the people who see, who have contact with these children, and of course all the teachers in the classrooms, and this is the extended family, should be watching and looking out for these kids to see if there are some behavioral changes, if there are some emotional changes in this child, if there are some physical changes in the child. So that is some of the areas that may be a problem if you see children exhibiting any of those particular areas. So I want to go a little bit more back to this whole story of Ammon and Tamar, and to really hear from you, Minister Fowler, the way how that situation was handled back then in today's society when you're talking to a Christian mother or a Christian parent. How would you recommend, according to, I can close it until I finish. Yeah. So how would you recommend, what would you recommend that they do?
Miranda, go back to that question again, Miranda.
So I was saying, in the context of what happened with Amnon and Tamar and Absalom, and the way they handled that situation in the family back then, how would you recommend today, if something like that happens in the Christian family, how would you recommend that family approach a situation like that? So give us some guidelines in terms of what should be happening.
Well, according to the law now, we're going to deal with the law. Christians too supposed to be carrying out the law. So if the mother find out that her child is being molested or abused, she's supposed to get the law involved. She's supposed to get the law involved, because then that's the law now. I don't feel like it's a matter that you should just say, well, okay, it's the family matter. Let's just see how we're going to keep it covered. No, we have to be dealing with that, because it's not just it's that child that we have to protect. We have to protect her sanity. And I know sometimes when the law is involved, there's exposure, but then you have to do that. And that's the because it's not a matter like how Absalom told Tamar, "That's your brother, so don't say anything about it." Because then the thing about it is, Miranda, it just don't stop there. You might keep it quiet, but then look at what happened during that time. You're keeping it quiet, all the bitterness and the resentment that is taking place. So it's best that you get right at the root. And the law is there. It's there that the law have to be involved. And that goes for anyone, father, brother, or sister. The law is supposed to get involved.
What do you say to the person who says, we are going to keep it in the family, we're just going to pray about it? We're going to pray about it because, that's how some people, we just going to pray about it, and we can trust God that everything's going to be all right. So talk to some people who may be thinking that.
Well, Sister Miranda, to think about thinking, I think that's being selfish. That's being selfish, and you're not thinking, well, if I have to talk to a mother concerning this matter, I have to let her know it's not just about her, it's about that child. Because it's not the child she's protecting at that time, she's protecting herself, her own identity, or her own, what I must say, her own character. She's not really thinking about her child, because if she's thinking about her child, she would want to deal with that matter. So I would not encourage her to keep it cover up. I would have to tell her that she need to think about that child welfare, think about that child's future, and deal with it. Get the law involved, because if that person could have been cruel enough to abuse that child, they would be cruel enough to deal with the matter. Because it would not stop there. If you cover it up once, it will happen again. So if he was deal with to hurt that child, he should be strong enough to take the consequences.
All right, so what about a mother who is a stay-at-home mom? If something like that happens and she is totally dependent on that husband or boyfriend, depending on what that situation is, totally depending on them for financial support, and she doesn't want to report it because if he's taken out of the home, she has no physical financial support that she can see because she doesn't work. And so how do you handle someone who may be in a situation like that?
Boy, but Miranda, that's still I know that there are some mothers that are caught up in situation like that, but my standards still remain the same, because then it's not about your security, it's not about your protection, it's about the child. It's about the child. And so if you want to keep that husband, that man in your house, well then the social workers or the social service will have to get involved and move the child away from the home. That will not be something I condone, to keep it undercover, to say, well, okay, I understand you need your husband or you need that man to protect you, or to pay your rent or whatever financial need, meet your financial need. I wouldn't condone that. I would have to be concerned about that child. Well, move the child away from the home and let social service get involved.
So we were just talking about children who are maybe sexually abused and some of the symptoms and signs that they may be exhibiting. And I want to move on to the signs of sexual abuse in teens and young adults that you may see and kind of overlook at some point, because they too can fall victim, of course, to sexual abuse. And so some of the things that you want to be in the lookout if this is your teenager or your young adult, again, is rapid weight loss or weight gain. If they're gaining weight or losing weight, or they have some kind of eating disorder, all of a sudden now they have bulimia, they're eating but they're throwing up the food, or they don't want to eat and they start to begin to have problems with their body image. That's a sign that something may not be going on right with them. Or they have unexplained bruises on their body, or other evidence of physical violence. There was a report that I also read that nowadays a lot of teenage girls are experiencing sexual and domestic violence while they're still in high school. They're with these young guys, some their peers and some older men, and they're being sexually violated and physically abused while even in school. So if you see bruises on these young girls, or anything that's unexplained, they can't give an account for why this thing is happening, that may be a symptom. Or they may contract a sexually transmitted disease. I mean, you didn't even know they were sexually active, or you may know, but now they have a sexually transmitted disease. You know definitely something is going wrong there. Or they have emotional disorders, so they plague with anxiety and panic attacks and depressions and suicidal thoughts and all those kinds of things. There are also symptoms for them. Or you see them cutting. If they have scars and all that stuff on them too, that's a sign. So now we're talking about teenagers and young adults. Or significant changes in their personal hygiene. This is the one I found very interesting. They start caring less. And so all of a sudden, they don't care about how they look anymore. They don't take showers every day or as frequently as they should. If you begin to see this kind of behavior in your home with your teenagers or young adults, something may be going on. Or they start drinking and using drugs. Um, they are talking, they're withdrawing from close friendships. So, for example, you know somebody who was their good friend all along, went through primary school, junior high school together, and all of a sudden now that particular person is no longer their friend. So they change, they have these abrupt changes in their friendships, and they go in isolation. Those and then when they go in isolation from their friend, you know, they only clinging to this one person who is their quote unquote boyfriend or something. We already know one of the signs of an abuser is they like to put people in isolation. They like to tear people away from their family and their friends and keep them to themselves in isolation, and they convince them that nobody else loves you the way I love you. When you see your teenagers or your young adult children now, all of the friends, the childhood friends that they've always had, all of a sudden, they are only hanging out with this young man or this young woman all the time, and they dropped everybody else. Something, that's a red flag. That something could perhaps be going on. So let's go to now some signs of sexual abuse. Watch this in adults and the elderly, because a lot of us may have aging parents or have parents who in these hospices and different situations, old folks homes and something like that. You should be concerned about them too. So here are some of the symptoms, because they are also vulnerable to sexual abuse. So any mention of sexual activity by the elderly adult, no matter what context they mention it, if they're talking about sex, it must be assessed. You have to think about that. You have to think about if all of a sudden they in this home or something and they talking to you about sex, you have to think that should be a red flag. You should begin to be alert, because what could be happening is it could be one of the workers. Well, that's the only people that they're around. So it could be one of the workers actually sexually abusing them. So if they're talking about that, or physical signs of abuse, such as they wet in the bed now, not because they can't control their bladder, but all of a sudden this is happening, that may be a sign for them. Or you see bruises on them when you go to visit them. You see bruises on them, you know something is wrong. Or if they contract a sexually transmitted disease, or they're fearful of a particular caregiver when that person's name is called, or when that person comes into the room, if you may be visiting them or something could possibly be going wrong. And so there are so many things that we need to be more sensitized and aware of when it comes to sexual abuse in our children, in our teens, in our young adults, in our elderly, because we know that we come from a culture and a society where people used to say children should be seen and not heard, and they don't want children to talk. And nowadays now we're encouraging children to talk. But I want to say that it's important that in your homes, in our village, that we kind of create that kind of environment where children feel safe to talk. Because some people, because they are still so closed in as adults, that they don't even spend time talking to their children or their grandchildren. And so if you haven't created that kind of atmosphere in your home and in your surroundings, more likely than not, that child will be afraid or timid to want to share something like personal with you. So, Mom, you're a mother, you're a grandmother, probably a great-grandmother as well. Let's talk about how important that dynamic is of being able to talk to your children, your grandchildren, etc. Wait a minute, I can't hear you. Your mic is off. Start over.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Yes, yes, Miranda. It is important that for the atmosphere to be conducive for your children to talk to you. But then, in some cases too, children still yet feel better, more relaxed talking to other people other than their parents. Because when my children were growing up, and I was amazed to hear that some mothers will say their children don't talk to them. But then when my children got grown, then I could understand that. It happens, you know. But but it is important that if it's not the mother, there may be a big sister, somebody in the family they should be able to talk to be open with to discuss if something like that is happening. But I want to go back to, if you don't mind, to some of the signs that you mentioned. What about if these signs are not noticeable, or if there isn't any of these signs? Just suppose that that young girl agrees with what is happening and does not see it as an abuse. How do you think you should deal with that?
So, even if she doesn't see it as abuse, if she's underage, which the age of consent in the arms is 16, I don't know why, but if she's underage, it's still abuse because she's not old enough to give consent.
Maybe she cover up some of these signs. She's taking care of herself. She's taking care of herself, and she's still jolly, and she's still keeping up with her homework. But then she feels comfortable with this man that she claims love her, and then maybe she says she loves this man. So how do we deal with that?
The thing is, you can't be held accountable for what you don't know. And so if her behavior hasn't changed, and that's why we're talking about the signs that made the emotional signs, and at some point I don't think she could fully mask that because it's going to show up in some area of her life. And so while you can't be held accountable for what you don't know, that's why I think it's important to do shows like these so that you begin to sensitize people that she may not do this, but she may do that. And so there's a whole buffet of different types of behavior and reactions that the person may exhibit. So it may not be all of them. It may just be one of them or two of them.
The parents must be paying close attention to the children's actions.
You know what? That's difficult for parents, especially if you're working parents. I know it's difficult for you to be, and then as teenagers, I could remember myself being a teenager. When you get a certain age, and if you have your room, you spend more time locked up in your room by yourself than being out front watching TV with everybody or all that kind of stuff. So you have yourself in this isolation just because you're a teenager and you don't want to be bothered necessarily with your little brother or little sister or your mother or father or whatever your family dynamics are. So it is a challenge to really honestly keep up with them. But I do believe that's why it takes work. It ain't no overnight something, and it's that the cost of trying to build this relationship with this child throughout the course of their life, being involved throughout the course of their life. And even for the best who have had these amazing relationships with their kids, you hear parents sometimes when things happen, I just didn't know. And so sometimes it slips through the cracks. Things can slip through the cracks. It happens. But I believe the more aware that we are, and self-aware, not only that, that's why the village is so important. Because if you have that friend or that aunt or older brother or sister or something that may end up spending more time with them than you do as a parent because of your obligations elsewhere trying to keep everything together, then you depend on those other people to keep you informed about what's happening in the child's life. And so it's not just one particular thing that they may exhibit, you know?
But then you do need a village, because then what I might miss, you might pick up. You see, or what that child may display before you, she might not display it to me. You see, so that's why we do need each other. And then this whole thing is not one size fit all. So that's why we do need each other. Um, and this is a wide topic, really.
And so that's why there's this whole list of all the different ways that can manifest. So it's just not no one way. Because guess what? Like, as you mentioned, the child's grade may not drop, but the child may be sleeping more. The child may be a little bit more irritable. The child may pull away and be in isolation and don't want to talk to nobody ever. And just these little signs could really be indicative. I'll give you an example. Just the other day, I was talking with a young lady and her mother. And one of the things that the mother was complaining about, and she's a young adult, she's like 20 something, still living, but her and her mother live together. And the mother was complaining about how untidy this girl was. Like, she would not clean up anything. She would not wash dishes. Her clothes would be piled up for weeks, and she would not wash. And so the mother is complaining to me about the daughter. I happen to know both of them. And the daughter is complaining to me about her mother trying to treat her like a child and control her and all this kinds of stuff. So they're button heads because the daughter is saying, yes, I'm your child, but I'm an adult. You can't tell me when to wash my clothes. You can't tell me when to wash dishes. And so this is this argument that they're having back and forth. As I spent more time talking to the daughter, she began to share some things. And now it makes sense to me based on the research that I've done. And one of the things is that she was sexually abused. She was sexually abused. Now, her mother was aware of that and they dealt with it, right? However, now I understand that untidiness, not wanting to take showers regularly, and this is a working girl, and to the extent the mother is so fed up with her that she was saying she even smells. And she's trying to tell her, you need to be more diligent, you have to take a bath. But the girl is taking offense to it because she's saying, I'm an adult, you can't tell me what to do. But now I understand that's a symptom. So while her mother is aware of what happened to her, the reality is the girl never went to therapy. She never went to a counselor. And so while everything else may be going on in her life and she's working and all that stuff, that's an area. So that's not something, I mean, you look at that with the naked eye, we'll just say, oh, she nasty. She need to learn how to clean up, but not understanding. And I only know this now that is a symptom of what she has experienced.
Does she blame her mother for any of what have happened to her?
She didn't blame her mother. She didn't blame her mother for what happened to her because her mother didn't know It happened. She told her mother about it after it happened. So it wasn't a situation where it was in their home or anything like that. But obviously the low self-esteem and all that stuff that came along with this violation that she experienced, she now felt like, well, I don't even want to be attractive anymore. You see? So nobody would notice me, so that this can now happen to me again. And so, whether consciously or subconsciously, that's why her behavior is that way. And so, but her mother can't see it. Her mother can't see this is her not cleaning up is a symptom. That's not the real problem. That's just a symptom of a greater problem that the daughter really needs to be in like a controlled environment and with a professional going through therapy. Her mother is one of those what we call the Bible pounding type of so what don't believe in therapy and all that kind of stuff. You see? And believes that okay, one prayer and that's it. Right? And I often tell people I believe in miracles. I know God is well able to just take something away. But there are many things in our lives that it's a process of getting over and working through. That happens to be one of them, obviously. But her mother wasn't even willing to entertain the thought of even going to a therapist. And so that never happened. And so she's now as a young adult now, obviously debating going for this help and how she's going to pay for it or what she has to go through, sign up through the system or whatever. But that's something now that she's considering because now she recognizes that some things are out of control. And she doesn't even understand why she's behaving the way she is in some respects. And so it speaks again to what you said about a mother who is aware of a child being abused and not reporting it as being selfish. It's being selfish because you just never know how that's going to be manifested in that child's life. You just never know. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to that. Okay, so when we're talking about all of these abuses and the list and all the different signs, like it's like Minister Fowler was saying, it's just not one cookie cutter thing that everybody could follow and this is what it looks like and this is what you should do because family dynamics are different. Some families believe in therapy and they would have taken that child right away and signed them up. And some believe, no, we can just pray and we can work this out and God can fix it. And then when you have that kind of dynamic working, the child, that the victim is not getting any help, and you taking them to church and they hearing it, but nobody is speaking to their specific needs, what they're experiencing right now, that emotional pain and that mental pain, or even the physical pain that they may have experienced or be experiencing at the time. And if that's not being addressed, we end up with this dysfunctional society that we live in. And people begin to behave in different ways. And you wonder why. With the work that I do, I know you counsel a lot of people. With the work that I do nowadays and talk to different people from different walks of life who have experienced a lot of things and come to a place in their life where they feel stuck and they don't understand why they can't move past a particular point. More likely than not, it always goes back to something what happened to them as a child. Something that wasn't addressed. And it doesn't have to be any type of abuse, you know.
While you're right there, I'm thinking about this young lady. She might be angry at her mother without even knowing why. Maybe she might be angry because her mother, like what I'm gonna say, that she can't really explain her true feelings to her mother, or her mother. She may be thinking that her mother is blind to what she's what is the real problem that she's dealing with, and she might be frustrated at her mother. I'm not directly blaming her for what happened, but blaming her indirectly because she is not aware or wise up to what is really taking place in her personal life. Because sometime people expect you to understand some things that you don't, that you don't understand, and they expect, and they could become angry at you because then you should know this, you should understand this, and so that could be a way of retaliating. That why the daughter act the way she do, because as a mother we expect our mothers to understand some things.
There's definitely a level, while I still don't say it's a blame, there's definitely a level of frustration that she does have. Again, but the frustration stems from the fact that the mother isn't open to even co and consider coming to therapy with her, going and doing that. So the frustration is that she really just, this mother is dead set on God could fix it. We don't need, you see? And that's where the frustration lies with the daughter. The frustration is that she's not even open, because I've spoken to the mother based on what the daughter said, and nope, she doesn't, she ain't budging. And so definitely that is going to accelerate the kind of feelings that the child has, because the mother isn't willing to budge. But on the same token, she's a young adult now, and so the shift is now in what can you do to help to get yourself back on track. What can you do for yourself so that while you may be frustrated with your mother, she can't fix you.
So that is something the daughter have to get over, and take full responsibility now for her own well-being. Because then if she know her mother, if her mother is stuck there and not moving to help her, she got to do it now and go on and help herself. She have to go on and help herself. But this is and Miranda, it is so prevalent all around, because sometime where you look for help, the people you look to help for too, they need help, because that mother, she need help. She need help too. If she just, because even when you don't pray, you got to get, when you finish praying, you got to get up and do some things. You got to, I call it, you have to go and walk out your prayer.
It's the whole faith without works is dead. So you have the faith and you believe that God is able to do anything, and nothing's impossible with him, but you ain't putting no work behind it. It's that combination. And so the girl is in a place now where she is working, like I said, and seeking on her own as a young adult now to go and see about herself, and recognizing that she's the only person who is responsible for her. So if she doesn't work it out, but these are the things that, and the ways, that's just one way that somebody who has been abused may manifest, may act out. And with somebody who's closed-minded, and they're not even understanding that all of these things are connected. And they are connected because of this one act that happened to this person at some point in their lives. And I think that's the importance of us being more sensitive to the people around us in general. Because tonight we happen to be focusing on children, but adults could exhibit some behaviors, as we talked about, the anxiety, the depression, the aggressiveness and the anger and all that stuff, and that comes from somewhere. And we may not know where that comes from, but we may be the recipient of that aggression and that anger, and we have no idea where it comes from. But I think it's an opportunity when things like that happen, for conversation, if the person is in fact open to the conversation. So in parting words, let's go, because we're gonna wrap up. In parting words, what do you want to say to people who um, may identify with any of the things that we have discussed tonight? What would you say?
You're talking about identifying it in someone else. Well, one of the things I would say is to see if they can get that person that they see the signs in to talk to them. Because then when you can get them to communicate, you can really find out what is really happening. But then if they are not talking, you can only go on and assume. So it's good when we can get them to open up, to talk to us, or to trust us to talk to us. And in that, you really need wisdom to be able to have them open up and talk to you and to let you know what is really taking place. And then when you find out what is taking place, you know what to do from there. But I really want to encourage parents, mothers, sisters, or siblings. If they find out something, they see some signs, investigate, find out what is really happening. Don't just leave it to say that it will work out, or it will change, or maybe that's just a child. If these signs that Miranda, you talked about tonight, if we see it happening, these are things that we should really investigate and pay close attention to, and really try to talk to that child to find out what is really happening. Because then that child can be so frustrated and frightened too, because of what is happening. That's just the way they react, because of what is taking place in their lives. So it's good if we can just find a way that we can have them trust us to open up to us, to talk.
And I just want to emphasize creating that type of environment in your home where your children, grandchildren, extended family feels comfortable, that there's a safe place that they can come and share what's happening in their life. It may not even be something traumatic, but there are some families that people don't talk. They just don't have that type of relationship. They definitely don't talk around a dinner table, and they just don't talk in general. And so I think, if anything, I want to leave with, even if that's something that somebody watching may be struggling with in their family, to try to begin the process of extending yourself, if you have to be that bridge, to try to connect people, to be that bridge that they can cross. And maybe you have to be that safe space, that person that they can come to and share whatever traumas they may be experiencing, or whatever troubles or situations that they want to they may be experiencing, and they feel like there's nobody to talk to in their family, so obviously they're going to talk to somebody else. And I think we need to do a better job as families in talking, and being concerned about each other's well-being, and just because some families, it's amazing to me, I hear people say they haven't spoken to their sibling or their somebody like in months or years in some cases, and that's how some people live. And that's amazing to me, because I know life happens and you get busy, but when a year passed, 2 years passed, 3 years passed, and you haven't spoken to somebody that you share the same blood with, that's pretty scary to me. Hmm.
Um, I believe relationship, even if the child isn't talking to you, you would be able to know that there is definitely something wrong. If you are paying attention to your child, And maybe that child might not come directly and talk to you. Oh man. Miranda. Oh, Miranda.
I can hear you. Keep talking.
I said, maybe that child might not come and talk to you right off the top, but then if you are paying, say like with my children, maybe they might not come right out and talk to me right off the top or volunteer and come to give the talk to me, but then I would know definitely that there's something that they're dealing with. And because I know that there's something that they're dealing with, I can go and confront them, because then I know their action, I know their moods, and so depending on the mood, I know that there's something wrong, and so I can go and talk to that person. And so maybe we do need to have that kind of relationship. Now we know that the children today, they don't volunteer to just to talk, to, especially the adult one. They don't just volunteer, or not so much the adult, the teenage. The in between, let's say the in between, they won't just volunteer just to come out and tell you their business. But if you know them, and know that they know their different moods, you would know that there's something happening. And if you go and confront them, I'm talking from my own experience, they would open up and say what is happening, even if they don't just volunteer and do it. So I do think that we need to build a family relationship, and it starts with the parents. It do start with the parents. Yeah, because the children can only follow with the parents, how the parents lead, like that, as far as relationship is concerned.
So, with that note, this brings to an end another edition of Swerve with me. It's been such a wonderful pleasure to sit in your presence, Minister, and to have this talk to really, for some, perhaps begin that kind of dialogue in their homes and among their families. And I think it's important to say it, because even though the child, the grandchild, the adult child, whoever, may not respond right away to this invitation to open up to you or whatever, I think it's important to say it, so that they know that no matter what happens to you, no matter what's going on in your life, you can always come to me and talk to me about it. Watch this, with no judgment. With no judgment. That's important, because a lot of reasons why people don't talk is because in their mind they already say, I know if I go and talk to her, what she can say. Now they don't know, but that's what's in their mind. And so I think it's just important to put it out there and say to them, we can talk. And of course, if they need correction, you have to do that. You're obligated to do whatever it is. But just to begin to create that atmosphere. So thank you once again for joining me. This has been Swerve with me, and we've been talking about child sexual abuse and some of the symptoms, physical, emotional, behavioral issues that they may be experiencing, as well as teens, young adults, and the elderly. So until next week, same time, same place, have a wonderful week, and good night, everybody.